Everyone, welcome to today's video. Welcome to the Gamer channel. Thank you very much for tuning in. So I'm not a huge fan of doing these videos because I don't necessarily get the feedback that I expect, because I usually talk about the division from either the gameplay side or I talk from what I think I understand from the corporate side. Now, from the corporate side, I honestly don't know much. All I have is what the company makes public and some of the things that we've seen, and then even the patterns that they've used in the past to carry out their gaming program or their calendar or their sequence or whatever it is you want to call it. And so today's video is going to be something that I believe that Ubisoft, in a sense, is not necessarily communicating out there. And not until people actually go out and look at this data are they convinced, or maybe not convinced, that Ubisoft does have a very, very special place for the division in its catalog of games. So there is still, and will always still be until we see these games, kind of the sentiment out there that the Division 2 is basically being, in a sense, overshadowed by the Star Wars game that they're working on and the Avatar game. And the answer to that is actually kind of true. These two games seem to be, in a sense, where Ubisoft is looking for a broader audience appeal in case of those two games. I mean, Avatar, yes, somebody said, how does a theme park get a video game? Well, it's one of what we call, or what movie people and critics call, one of the biggest successful failures in movie ever. I mean, Avatar, even though it may not have been the strongest presentation in terms of critical movie, display, it still is one of the most successful or fiscally successful movies that's been produced ever. So I guess that's kind of how it is. Ubisoft was probably vying to get this game done. In fact, they did go ahead and approach James Cameron's studio that they wanted to make a game about it. This is something that's said in their presentation on how they got the Avatar project. They mentioned it, that they approached James Cameron, they showed him what it is that they had, and their people at Lightstorm looked at Ubisoft and their productions in the past, and they thought that Ubisoft Massive was going to be capable of doing this. Now, if you come back to it, you say, okay, well, there's that, but what about the division? What's the Star Wars thing doing? Well, Star Wars license, in terms of the way, Disney had decided to allow the licensing from different companies, eventually came to light that EA did no longer have that exclusive license to making Star Wars games. So what's going on is the Star Wars video game production deal is now much more ubiquitous. There are many, many more studios that are capable right now of working on Star Wars games. In fact, it's been confirmed that we have anywhere from about 3 to 4 Star Wars games that are major games in the making. In fact, EA the other day announced that they had about 3 Star Wars games in the works, one of them including Jedi Fallen Order Part 2, another one is supposed to be a first-person shooter, and another one's going to be a strategy game. Add that to Ubisoft Star Wars game, you have 4. The Skywalker Saga, that's a Lego game, is coming out in April, you have 5, and then the one that was done by that studio that made Detroit Become Human game, that's also 6. So those are just the ones that I can mention off the top of my head. And I think what Disney and Star Wars is trying to do is get more games out there, and for us to have that Age of the Force Unleashed and all the other games present, where you have a lot of Star Wars IPs and franchises everywhere, just to continue to boost sales and all of that crazy stuff. But I don't think it really does matter on the long term. And I say that because Ubisoft presents their earning calls, which is something I mentioned at the end of my last video, about how many IPs they own as primary IPs. You see, one thing is Ubisoft is a very, very investor centric company, and I think this is where we kind of have some push and pull. Gamers want all this stuff from Ubisoft, but Ubisoft is more than necessarily, in a sense, trying to cater to their investors in at a higher rate than anything else, because their investors really do seem to be able to ask some really very strong questions, as seen in the earnings call. So in one of their earnings calls, I remember reading, I think this was from like somewhere around 2019, 2020, they presented a lot of these games that they have. They talked about how many games they have that have sold more than 10 million copies, which is actually a big deal. I know some of you say, oh, GTA sold 100 million copies. Like, well, there will never be another GTA ever again. Watch. Even GTA 6 probably still won't be as expansive in terms of sales like GTA 5. I know if you want to bet 50 cents on it, let's do it. I'll probably bet with you. But GTA 5, it basically ran the market at a very opportune time. GTA 6 is not going to see that. There are too many games competing right now, but that's a whole different story down the road. But back to the earnings call, after that rabbit trail that we chased, they presented that of other game publishers, they owned more of their IPs than any other competitor in the market, which included Activision Blizzard. At the time, Activision Blizzard had not yet, in a sense, been acquired or potentially acquired by another big conglomerate, as well as EA and even Take-Two. They did this comparison because this is something that the company prides itself on. Now, in the Star Wars, Avatar, and the Division mix, which game do you think Ubisoft finds a lot more appealing to investors? In my opinion, anyone who's a critical investor will pick the Division game because that is an IP that is very centered around Ubisoft's ownership. You see, when they make the Avatar game and when they make the Star Wars game, profitability has to be factored in because some of the profits, I guess, this is how these agreements work, would have to be split with the owners of these IPs. But in the case of the Division, all the profits stay within the company. So from an investor perspective, if you kind of think about it, you really want Ubisoft to make more games that they own the exclusive licenses to. It just makes mathematical sense, in my opinion. I think the other projects, yes, even though profits will be shared, it is still something of consideration because you have to look at sales and sales potential. What if those games don't necessarily appeal to a broad audience, and then on top of that, the profits still need to be split according to whatever agreements have been signed? Then I think you start to see exactly why, from an investor perspective, you need for these companies to make games where they don't necessarily have to be splitting a lot of the profits. So however you want to shake it, a Division game is much more profitable for the company and for investors. So when people say the Division is dead, I have to say, have you considered this aspect of the conversation? Because if you don't consider it, you'll be looking at player counts, which player counts are actually a bunch of people playing the game. I log in every time, any random safe house I go into, I ask, what are y'all doing here? Because there are a bunch of people on PlayStation playing. Some of you have said Xbox still has a bunch of people playing as well. Now, yeah, PC may be dry, but the game is not centered around just one platform. So these conversations have to be pointed out from time to time, and I try to make these videos so that I can argue this case because it is a case that tries to lend, credence to whatever is happening. Now, the Division Heartland is kind of a weird, game in my opinion. I strongly believe that its entire premise is just strange because why would anybody want to make a free-to-play version of the Division when it has a lot of potential in terms of profitability, even as a paid game, because Ubisoft exclusively owns the rights and keeps basically 100% of the profits? I guess it's probably them trying to explore the free-to-play market, and they've been pushing all of these different ideas out there. X-Defiant seemed like one of them. Even the Ghost Recon Frontline seemed like one of them. And I think they wanted to have something that is set up for the Division community or people who may like these kinds of games. So I think this is what it is. But whether it be a free-to-play game, whether it be a revamp or reboot or expansion of the Division 2, or whether it be another Division game, at the end of the day, there is still profits that they have to make that they get to keep in their pockets. And so even if they're making these other games down the road, it doesn't really make any difference. They can hire more people, which they are hiring, if they have the funds available to still make those projects, keep themselves out there, continue to make themselves competitive on the big scene. But make no mistake, they have to keep these profits that are coming in from their Tom Clancy games, that are coming in from their Assassin's Creed games, their Watchdog games, their Immortals Phoenix Rising games, if they continue to even make that IP. But this is something that you have to just basically say they don't necessarily have any interest in letting these IPs just go away for a long time. And so this is basically my argument so far regarding this situation. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments section. I appreciate you guys for watching the video. Thanks so much, and we'll talk very soon. Peace out.